All right. Okay, well, welcome everybody to Solar Noon Tuesday, and I'm going to go ahead and start out with the news of the week from Solar. I'm working with two screens here, so now I've got to find there we go. So, all right, so what's the news in Solar this week? Well, according to the EIA, renewables outperformed both coal and nuclear for the first 3 quarters of 2022. Actually, they produced about 23% of all of the electricity that's used on the American electric grid. And of that renewable breakdown, wind is about 9 3/4, solar about 5%, hydro 6 1/4, and geothermal and biofuels makes up the balance, about 2%. Coal, on the other hand, just under 20% at 19.9%. That's significant. If you think about just 10 years ago or so, coal was about 50% of the generating capacity on the grid. Then we have nuclear at about 18%, and natural gas is still the big dog at 39.75% of all of the power generated on the grid. Actually, we've seen about a 15.5% rise in renewable over same time last year over that. Puerto Rico just requested about $5 billion from the federal government to rebuild their grid. It's been 5 years since Hurricane Maria sort of devastated or wiped out the electrical system on the island, and they're still suffering from widespread blackouts, major blackouts there. So they're hoping to make the grid more resilient by interspersing not only solar but wind and battery backup into the grid. So that's going to be a major project down there. Fusion Fuel, which is a Spanish company, as well as Electus Energy, have announced a joint venture where they're going to be building the largest green hydrogen facility. It's going to be located near Bakersfield, California. Now, this facility is going to cost about $180 million, and they're anticipating it'll generate about 9,300 tons of hydrogen each year, which is about enough to fuel about 1,000 buses or trucks per day using fuel cells. Now, I'm not a big fan on hydrogen. I think it has its own set of problems. But when they talk about green hydrogen, basically there's a color code that's emerged to try and describe the different types of hydrogen. Green hydrogen, for example, is hydrogen that's made using renewable energy sources, usually through an electrolysis process where they separate water, into hydrogen and oxygen. Blue is carbon capture. So that's from a fossil fuel source, but it's using heat carbon capture rather than just burning the fuel itself. Brown or black, well, actually, I skipped over gray. Gray is hydrogen that's manufactured using natural gas, and that is the most common form of hydrogen that's generated in the US at the moment, which is one of the reasons I'm not keen on hydrogen. They always like to talk about how it's a renewable energy source, but almost all of it is generated by using natural gas, and the offshoot of that is carbon dioxide. So it's a dirty fuel at the moment. Brown or black is made from coal as a power source. Pink from nuclear. Turquoise, this is a new one that they brought on, but that's essentially taking solid carbon and going through a process. It's like coal gasification to make the hydrogen. Yellow, they'll sometimes refer to that as being produced through solar, but then it's also used as a term that's just grid energy without any distinction about what that means. And then white, this is hydrogen that occurs naturally, pretty rare, but it does happen. So those are all your theoretical different colors of hydrogen. Swell Energy raised about $152 million to create a virtual power plant project. We've talked about this in previous sessions. These projects are going to be primarily in Hawaii, New York, and California. What they're going to be doing, they plan to deploy or aggregate about 16,000 energy storage systems as part of this project, creating a 600 megawatt hour virtual power plant using these batteries. And I assume some of them may be electric vehicles, others will be stationary batteries. But virtual power plants are a way that we're going to hear a lot more about this. It's essentially creating a power plant by aggregating facilities into effectively a virtual large-scale power plant. And General Motors recently announced that they're thinking that their electric vehicle program will be, in their words, solidly profitable by the year 2025. Which is pretty quick since they're just gearing up. In fact, in 2025, they anticipate they will be manufacturing for the North American market more than 1 million units, electric vehicle units for North America. To give you a sense of perspective, they hope by the end of 2023 to have manufactured 400,000 total electric vehicles. And as an example of kind of workforce they're looking at, they've opened up a battery plant in Warren, Ohio, and they're looking to hire 1,000 new workers at that battery plant, just the one facility here in Ohio. And to just sort of point out that not everybody in renewable energy are wearing the white hat and doing everything perfectly and good. A jury just recently awarded $6.5 million to Honeybee Ranch. And Honeybee Ranch was located right next to a solar farm. And the solar farm was being developed by Bayware. I think it's sometimes called Baywa RE for renewable energy. Anyway, as this plant was going underway, Honeybee Ranch expressed concerns about stormwater runoff, vegetation being removed from that location. Bayware assured them that the vegetation removal would be minimal, that they would reseed it, that they would deal with stormwater runoff. And apparently, according to the jury, they did none of that. And of course, Honeybee Ranch flooded out because of the runoff. They didn't reseed. So the jury essentially awarded Honeybee Ranch all of the profits from the project that Bayware would have received, as well as awarding them avoided costs for Bayware skimping on that project. So that's an interesting tidbit there, something we'll have to keep an eye on. And that's the news from the solar industry, the abbreviated news, considering it was a holiday week. So anybody have any comments, or anybody have anything they'd like to add, things going on in your neck of the woods other than Houston is without water at the moment? So anybody have anything to add? Okay, well then why don't I jump in here? The topic that I thought we would touch base on, there's been a lot of discussion going on with California net metering 3.0, or as some people are referring to it, 3.1 now, because they've gone back to the drawing board so many times. So I thought we'd really talk a little bit about some of the future of net metering and maybe get some input from y'all as to what's going on in your neck of the woods. And to give a sense of it, what is the current state of net metering? Well, this map kind of indicates that the states in orange have statewide net metering programs. Doesn't necessarily mean that that they're paying retail on it, but that these are statewide programs. The ones in green are indicating that there are transitions going on away from these net metering programs. The ones in purple basically say that there are compensation programs in place other than net metering, and blue says no statewide rules are in place, but some utilities are dealing with net metering. So that would be primarily Texas and Idaho. So that's where we're at. And it is transitioning, just as this slide here indicated the green ones. Some of the major players like Michigan, Illinois, California for sure, Indiana, I don't know, and Indiana and Kentucky, I wouldn't say major players in the world of solar, but players as well. So when we talk about net metering, it's like not all programs are created equal. So there are a lot of factors that go into what makes a net metering program. One of them is the definition of exactly what we mean by net metering. You know, are they paying retail when you pump energy back onto the grid? Are they paying wholesale, or what are they doing there? Who is currently covered? We'll touch a little deeper on that as far as, you know, are all utilities included in the net metering? Are co-ops exempted, municipals exempted, so on. Are they imposing demand charges or high access fees as part of the net metering program? What is their rollover program when let's say in the summer months, you push back more than you're using? Does that carry over until it's used up? Does it get zeroed out monthly? Does it get zeroed out annually? What does that mean? And do they allow for virtual net metering? In other words, if you've got multiple properties, can you put them all together and aggregate those? Can you do community solar, things of that nature? So, for example, what does net metering pay? Well, some of the programs that are out there is they guarantee a full retail rate. That's kind of what most people assume when they hear about net metering, that's what you're talking about, that my meter runs backwards when I'm overproducing, producing more than I'm using, and I get full credit. You know, it's wiping it off my meter, like rolling the odometer back on your car. Not that any of us have ever done that. Or full retail credits minus non-bypassable charges. For example, access fees. There may be some other programs that they simply do not allow you to bypass. You got to pay those. There's monthly offsets. Basically, are they paying you feed-in tariffs rather than retail on it? And let's see, no credit. Of course, F would be just no credit. You get nothing for what you send back. That would be the worst case scenario. What utilities are affected? Well, some states have all or nearly all utilities. Some, like Ohio, is investor-owned only utilities. Then there are some that not all of the investor-owned utilities are required to participate. And then, of course, some states have no net metering at all. I had not run into this before, but in the research that I was doing, apparently some utilities are even when you're net metered, are charging demand charges, even on retail customers. That seems, you know, essentially they're charging you for the infrastructure they have to provide, you know, over and above access fees. Many of them are charging larger access fees for people who have solar. For example, with our co-op, the access fee is $20 a month for everybody. That's just hooking up to the grid. That's your access fee. But if you have solar, then the monthly access fee is $42 a month. So how they came up with that, I don't know. You know, when I asked them about it, they said, well, we make a profit on selling power. And if you're using less power, then our access fees are, you know, we're making up for what we're losing because you're not buying power from us. And my response there was, well, if $42 is what it costs for you to hook me up, then shouldn't everybody be paying $42? And then you simply lower the cost of electricity, you know, to whatever it is that costs you, you know, allocate the costs fairly where the costs are being incurred. You know, I don't think anybody's asking these utilities to operate at a loss. We're just saying, you know, charge people appropriately, charge them, you know, where the charges are. And then what is their true up policy? You know, is it annual? Is it monthly? Can you carry it on forever? Does it expire? Virtual net metering, as we we're saying, and we run into this a lot with farms when I'm out doing assessments. For instance, they might have outbuildings, barns, things like that, and a home, and they're both on the same meter, or they may be separately metered. Well, if they're separately metered, I might want to put a big solar array on my barn that then covers both the barn and the home. But you've got to have the ability, the utility has to allow you to aggregate those bills. And then you could say, well, if it's an adjoining property, then what if I live up the hill, you know, 6 houses down? Couldn't I allocate it the same way? And then if you say, well, why do I have to live 6 houses down? Couldn't I live across town? You know, so now you're saying, all right, can you do what is effectively community solar? Is that possible? So those are some of the options that we're looking at when we talk about net metering and what that means. So then, well, before I move on, does anybody have any, what is the experience in your location? Any experience about net metering, what's changing, how that's changing for you recently, or maybe not? Give you just a second to respond.
Well, Jay, I'll tell you, with the Washington Electric Co-op, I have, they basically, instead of giving you a monthly thing, now they whatever they come up with their wholesale generation rate for the year, and that's what you get paid for the whole year. I don't know if Muskingum County or Guernsey Muskingum was the same way or not.
So you're basically getting wholesale rate for anything you export back?
I think it's a wholesale rate. It
Okay.
used to be would take whatever they paid us for the generation charge each month, and then they would credit you back the same thing. And now they came up with a flat rate for the year. I don't know if it's based on what it's based on, but it's based on something. But
yeah, yeah, with Guernsey Muskingum, basically their process, they do bump up the access fee, and like I said, $42 a month, but they will give you full retail for everything you produce that you feed back, up to what you consume. If you overproduce for the month, they don't institute any kind of cap on that. They'll give you their wholesale or their generation rate, you know, for the extra production. And you can then use that extra production to offset the access fee. So if you overproduce dramatically, which we've done on our array sometimes, you can net the bill out, you know, below zero even, and then they will carry that over to the next month. So to me, it's a fairly, except for the exorbitant access fee, their system is pretty good, you know, as far as how that works. But I think we're one of like 8 people on their system that have solar, so it's not a big deal to them. So we'll have to wait and see. Anybody else have any experience with your net metering situation? Yeah, Bill, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I will say that there's 4 or 5 that do pay you something. Green Mountain, 1 for 1. It used to be that Green Mountain at the end of the year would, if you overproduce net for the year, they would issue a large check. I know one person that got $6 grand.
Oh,
but they've dropped that, and Green Mountain is an NRG company.
and aren't they located up in New England? Were they primarily up in Vermont?
I think so.
Yeah, I knew a fellow who was one of the bigwigs at Green Mountain. He was actually president of Green Energy Ohio for a while. So they were, I think their whole shtick was about being supportive of renewable. So,
yeah.
Bill Dorset, did you have a comment?
Yes, we've got a rural electric up here that we've done a lot of business with, and their policies have changed dramatically. And I think it's either in response to them approaching the cap on their all power provision contracts, or possibly because they're losing revenue. But they went from $100 application fee to $500, and now they've gone to $1,000 for a solar application. And they've gotten really strict on making sure that nobody exports power to them. We have a family who has been wanting to put a system up on their lines, and they were wanting to put in 30 panels or a 7 kW system. And the engineer at the REC said, no, we'll allow you to do either a 3.5 kW system, or the alternative, if you still want a 7 kW system, is to put in the hardware required for a no export provision. So the no export zeroes out any possibility of transferring power from the daytime into the evening or the nighttime or the next day. It's not a rollover of any kind.
Goodness, that is restrictive. Even the $500 hookup fee is huge.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm not sure exactly what that's from, but they've put in 2 of their own 2 megawatt central arrays. And I think it may just be that they're bumping up against the percentage of capacity for solar that their cooperative can allow.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And what state is that, Bill?
That's Kansas.
Kansas. Yeah. Yep. And I assume that there is that the rural electrics are not subject to any statewide net metering laws.
No, they aren't.
Yeah.
It is interesting, though, that the big utility in Kansas that serves the eastern 2/3 of the state is a fellow named Ahmed Faruqi, and he's a rate expert from California that Evergy has brought in time after time to help them set rates for demand charges or access fees or net metering hearings. And in the last couple of months, he's completely turned around and is now saying that he really favors having solar for most of the country except Hawaii and California, and that he wants to couple it with time of use pricing. So he's gone to full net metering and time of use pricing for the power that's put back onto the grid. So his switch has really been an interesting turnaround.
Yeah. What do you think motivates that? The fact of who's paying him, or what?
Yeah, he did retire.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was his switch happened at about the time that he retired. So yeah, it could have something to do with that. But also, I think he also put solar on his own house
well,
in California.
Well, didn't you say you had sent me an email about were these guys the same guys who are involved in First Energy and all of that mess here in Ohio?
There are some of the same. They are some of the same stockholders. They're big holding companies that are investing in our big utility. And one of the things that they've done is that one of them is Elliott Management, and they were also involved in First Energy. And one of the things about them is that Elliott Management also owned, I think, something like 23% of Peabody Coal.
No.
So the coal purchases from Peabody went up in the year that they became part of the management team of Evergy Energy.
Well, and Peabody Coal has always been known as a good environmental steward. So we're pleased that they're getting into the electric generation market. It's always good. So we'll all listen to John Prine songs soon, right? Okay. Yeah. Any other feedback on what's happening? Because it strikes me that as we see these changes in net metering, and some jurisdictions are getting more liberal with their net metering, others are getting more restrictive. The ones that are getting more restrictive, it seems to me in the long term, are sort of slitting their own throats. they're essentially forcing people into battery systems where they deal with, more self-consumption, less sending back to the grid, and eventually not necessarily even needing traditional grid suppliers. If it gets too restrictive, we may find ourselves that at some point, generation plus storage will be less expensive than buying from the grid. We're already there for generation. Now, storage just has to come down in cost to change the way we deal with utilities, dramatically. So and as things occur, just feel free to jump in. But one of the things I wanted to go to was some perspectives. I was following a podcast about what was happening in California with the net metering 3.0. And there were some good insights, I thought, and they seemed to make sense. And I wanted to throw these out. One is as net metering grows up, because the industry is growing up, we're moving away from being paid retail for what we overgenerate and moving towards essentially avoided costs. The utility will pay us just what their wholesale generation rate is. So they'll treat those people exporting back to the grid just like they were any other supplier of energy. That's how much we're going to pay you. That's all we're going to pay you. So instead of, say, 20 cents a kilowatt hour, if that's the retail rate, now we're going to pay you 6 cents a kilowatt hour, which is what we pay to the power plants when we buy power from them. So I think that's just a reality that we're going to be facing as the industry grows up. The second thing in there was getting rid of the onerous penalties, the solar taxes, so to speak, on hooking up solar. Because if you're being treated just like any other provider of electricity, then why would you then be penalized for supplying that energy to the utility? So getting rid of some of these high hookup fees, some of these high access fees, if they charge demand charges, getting rid of those. And then I think all utilities are going to be moving towards time of use pricing models as opposed to just fixed kilowatt hour for their electricity. We see this in some markets already, California being most notable, where you're paying different rates based on when you are consuming the electricity, because it costs the utilities different prices, in low demand, mid demand, and high demand periods. So they should charge accordingly. So I think we're seeing that kind of transition where you're gonna get paid only for the value to the utility for the power you're pumping back onto the grid when you're pumping that power back onto the grid. Anybody have any perspectives? Disagree, agree, see that as a trend?
Not agree or disagree, but I'm in Minneapolis. I've got 6 kilowatts on my roof, and we have net metering here through Xcel Energy. And we've been happy with it because we were averaging 150 a month or more for our electrical bills. And we've been averaging about $50 to $100 a year. Now, we actually had a net refund for the first 2 or 3 years. And I think we've had just cloudier years and so forth. But pulled up my bill as everyone else was talking. And my favorite on the bill, can someone explain this? Affordability charge of 98 cents. They're charging me to make it affordable. What does anyone?
That sounds like a regulatory double speak.
I don't know. Otherwise, fuel cost charge. I think you mentioned that, right?
Yeah.
And there's a basic service charge, which I'm assuming even before we did the panels, there was a basic service charge, and then whatever you used. But we generated in the past month 331 kilowatts and used 429 delivered by Xcel. So we had a net delivered by Xcel. So we owe like $20. This time of year we start owing from about April through October, even November sometimes, we get a check, a paper check of all things. I just wish they would roll over the credit and we'd have one check to pay like in March, but I don't know. They still like paper, I guess, there at Excel. Anyway, but that sounds like Minnesota, from everything I know, it's toward the top end of the net metering, where they haven't, at least not yet. I know that they're lobbying to increase the charges overall for electricity, but that's where we are here in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I know Minnesota has really good community solar laws where community solar is widespread. In fact, I saw some of the local co-ops up there doing their own community solar projects. So it's pretty huge there, as opposed to, let's say, Ohio, which I'm very familiar with here, where community solar is now just for the first time getting a foothold into the state legislature. They've just passed some laws saying, we're going to do a couple of experimental projects just to see if this whole crazy concept might work. Like there are no other states in the union that they could look to and see that it does in fact work. But, baby steps here. But I really think we're going to start to see this pushback, systematic pushback against solar using net metering policies, because the public utility commissions where these things are legislated are typically dominated by the utilities. These are officials and processes that the utilities have created a relationship with those people in charge, and they know the language, they know the game, and they're much more effective at it than the general public or interests like solar. So we're going to see ourselves being pushed back there until some big player decides to come in and, try and create their own virtual utility, somebody like Apple or Intel or somebody like that who has more clout and more money, where they're just going to come in and push the utilities around a little bit. So anybody else have any other experiences they want to share on what's happening in the net metering world?
Very often, the utilities are the load curve for the utilities are proprietary information, so it's difficult to get those. But if you compare the load chart for a utility with the solar generation chart, at least in our part of the country, we have 70% of solar matches exactly with the peak power demand. And so the cost of generating that power and distributing it along the whole system through the transmission and distribution system, the cost right now is about 16.5 cents per kilowatt hour. It was about 23 cents until recently. We got more into wind. But if you compare the costs of generating and transmitting that power, the time of use pricing would be a great thing to have in our part of the country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're going to see that happening, pretty much everywhere. It always reminds me a little bit of, the saying from Gandhi where, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they attack you, and then you win. I think we're into this attack mode where renewable energy is an existential threat to the utility industry, and they will attack, and they will, through their systems that they have in place, try to prohibit or discourage the wholesale adoption of distributed energy. And we, as an industry, need to be prepared for that, and we need to fight back where we can. Some of it may just simply be bypassing the utility. I mean, that may be the ultimate technological fix, is this concept of distributed, large-scale, utility-scale distributed electricity a legacy of the 20th century, and the 21st century will emerge with something different. And who knows? Who knows? But I think I would put my money on that the utilities need to come up with some reason other than the delivery of electricity to keep us interested in being interconnected through the electrical grid. Just as the telecommunications industry had to come up with some sort of reason to keep us interconnected, as that technology changed. So who knows what that's going to be, but it's got to emerge, and these utilities have to change their mindset. They just have to, or they're going to go the way of the railroads, where they're still going to be around, but they're not going to dominate the economy the way that they had in the past. So, all right, any last, yeah, Bob, I see you raising your hand there. You're still muted as well. And Joe?
Yes. Wasn't the utility company saying that you cannot be off the grid if you want to be completely off the grid for emergency purposes thereof, where they wanted you to, stay completely on the grid, but you couldn't, like, some people wanted to be completely off the grid, but the electric companies were saying, no, you have to be on the grid at least for a fraction for, in the wintertime, things like that. So is that something that they may in the future say that, if we have the batteries to, completely supply our houses, that we really don't need to be on the grid?
Yeah, I think, I've run across it not with electricity, but with things like water and sewer, where a municipality would say, if water and sewer is available to you at your location, you must hook up. You can't operate independently of this system. And they may come back with legislation trying to force people to connect to the grid. I guess my reaction there would be good luck enforcing that. It seems like that's a fool's errand to basically make it illegal for you to be energy independent. That I think you're going to run into some pushback. Bob, you had a comment?
Yeah, first of all, I was going to echo what you just said. You got to watch out for the grid police would come out to your home, and well, they couldn't shut you down. It's hard to enforce, is the bottom line. But what I was going to bring up is, right now it costs too much to go off the grid.
Yeah.
With the battery walls and what we have, the amount of money, I mean, you're past $75,000 easily to go off the grid. I mean, would you need 3 power walls?
Yeah, I think as we start seeing electric vehicles being a practical alternative, but I don't know if that's a practical alternative for being fully off the grid. The grid is still a bargain. We can complain and moan about, how they're trying to discourage and they're adding costs and the like. But compared to buying your own battery system today, hooking up to the grid is still a pretty good bargain. But that's going to change, as pricing changes and as technology changes.
Well, how much right now do you think my electric bill is subsidized by the government?
Oh, well, you're in Illinois. I don't know.
By you.
I don't know that it's, well, gosh, I was going to say, I don't think it's subsidized at all, but clearly right-of-ways and things of that nature, there's always some sort of governmental subsidy for any large project. I
don't think we're getting the full bill.
Yeah, it's possible, although these utility companies seem to be making a profit. And I don't see a line item, of the government subsidizing. Although that said, there is a large investment by the US government in transmission systems. So that's something to look at as opposed to distribution.
So I think we should start a chart on how much it costs to go off the grid and track that as time goes on and look at new ways of doing that.
Yeah. Robert, you had a question. I see your hand up there, or a comment.
Yeah, I'll just comment that where the subsidy is probably that nobody's considering the cost of cleanup of,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's definitely a subsidy because of cleanup, and while I have the microphone here, what I found interesting is reading the local utility company, investor-owned utility company, Evergy's annual report, where they list solar as a risk, distributed generation as a risk to their business. They have a segment to their shareholders that explain, where there could be a risk to their investment. And they have like good weather can be, nobody buys electricity, or bad weather and they have to fix everything. But right in there is solar generation. And they admit that we can generate power every bit as cheaply as they can, which is huge because they have a lot more years behind them and a lot more technical experience. So that part is fascinating. Yeah. So we're at war, and they've got all the guns, but they got all the artillery because they can just not hook us up, and our systems require it. But like you say, someday batteries and other means of storage might tip the balance of power a bit.
Yeah, I think what we've seen, I'll give an example here in Ohio, where there was really a legislative war against wind energy here in Ohio. And they put in some requirements that you had to locate your turbines half a mile off the property line, setback, which effectively shut down all wind development in the state. And that was pushed through by First Energy and the American Natural Gas Association. And then Amazon came into the state, and said, no, we don't like that rule. You need to get rid of it. And very quickly, they got rid of it because Amazon is a more powerful player than these other guys.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. So when we start seeing companies like Intel or Google getting into the electricity as a utility, as a virtual utility, I think you're going to see some of the dynamics changing. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to change in our favor, but these guys all are out for their own profits. But it's something to, if I were a utility operator, I would definitely see the fact that solar and distributed energy is cheaper than what I'm producing on the market. That's definitely a risk. That's a threat.
Yeah. I do have a question about parallel generation. I'm not sure I understand it. Is it the same as a buy all, sell all plan, or do you get credit? Do you get retail value for what you send to the grid as long as it doesn't exceed what you bought from them in the billing period, which is the way it works here in Kansas currently?
Yeah, it depends. That is one option. And that's what a lot of people think of as net metering, is you're getting retail credit offset for what you generate up to whatever you consume. But that is something that's changing. Most utilities, if they're dealing with substantial levels of renewables coming back to them, they're trying to get out of that. And it makes sense from their perspective. Why would I be paying retail for power? I don't want to do that. I'm in the business of selling energy, not buying it at retail. So,
well, but there is the third component of retail, which is that I consume what I generate immediately. So, a sunny day, my air conditioner's on, that electricity went from the sun to the air conditioner, never did go to the utility company.
right.
And that, will they take that away too, where it's a buy all, sell all, it's wired to where my electricity from my solar panels goes directly to the grid, and then I have to buy it back at full retail? Is that what parallel generation is? Or is it more like that I get to keep what I produced as long as I consumed it immediately?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about there primarily is like a feed-in tariff, where you're just simply a producer feeding into the grid and you're paid
Right.
a compensation rate like any generator. I don't think they can get too much into the behind the meter activity. You know, once again, it would be almost impossible to enforce. And, you know, I think politically it would be very unpopular. You know, I think they can get their energy in more or their money in more nefarious ways rather than attacking, you know, the man is his castle kind of perspective, you know, because what I generate, what I consume, whatever happens on my side of the meter is none of your business. You know, I think that's a strong argument. I can't imagine.
And that's what typically parallel generation is what happens behind my meter is my business.
I don't know. I don't know the term parallel generation.
Me neither.
Yeah. I mean, we're generating in parallel with the grid. You know, I don't know. Does somebody else have know that term? What that means? No, I don't know. Maybe Robert, you just made that up. So
No. I didn't just make it
I know,
up.
I'm
It's our
teasing
two.
you.
It's our two choices
Oh,
in Evergy's territory, either net meter or parallel generation. We all go with net meter because it's such a better deal. But when after in Kansas, when they reach a 1% of peak base load, of peak load in solar, and I know it's confusing, but I can explain it. But anyway, once they reach that 1%, then net metering is over, and we have to go to parallel generation. And I'm not quite sure what that means. Is that a buy all, sell all? Or do we get to keep what we generate and consume immediately? Or do they, anyway, it's one of those two.
my guess, and I'm only guessing, is that they're basically then saying after they've reached that 1%, no longer will they treat that as a retail to retail, but it will be a wholesale rate. You know, like you're a generator just like any of the other generators.
That would kill solar in Kansas because our avoided fuel costs are like 3 or 4 cents and our retail is 12.
Yeah.
It would kill it.
Well, it wouldn't affect the behind the meter activity. What you're generating and what you're
yes.
consuming will offset a great deal. And then what happens, because we're seeing
Right,
this in
and
California, is
true.
then
Yeah.
battery storage, self-consumption becomes something that you'll say, all right, if you're only going to pay me wholesale, then I'm going to put in some batteries that allow me to store my excess capacity that I would have normally sent back to the grid. And then I will consume that on a daily basis when I would normally be drawing from the grid. And so now you're just using batteries for self-consumption. You know, and that we're already at a place where the economics pretty much will allow you to do that economically. You know, as opposed to selling it back to the grid at 3 cents a kilowatt hour or whatever, you know, just store it and use it. And that way you've avoided the 12 or 20 cent fee from the utility.
Right. And there's one other thing you can do. You can change your lifestyle a bit and only do laundry when the sun is shining and chill your house down when the sun is shining and then let it, then turn it off when the sun goes down. I mean, there's things, but it becomes much more complicated. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Then it's load management issues, you know, but again, with the smart circuit breaker boxes and those kind of things, you can begin to change that kind of, you can automate that behavior to a large extent. So.
Yeah, no, I agree. I hear you. The grid is a good deal. And not only is it a good deal, we've got a lot invested in it. It's a good thing. And let's use it to its maximum instead of going off grid. I hope the utility companies wake up and, like you say, offer something that makes us want to stay connected to this marvelous grid that we got, but still incorporates distributed generation because we're going to come anyway,
Yeah. Well, I think just sort of to sum this up, because we're coming to the end, I just feel like it's worth, as an industry, us beginning to just accept the fact that, as the utilities have to accept the fact that their world is changing, their world is coming to an end as they knew it, and they've got to deal with distributed energy and deal with it fairly. We as the solar industry are getting to the end of those beginning early adopter age of, we're going to pay you retail for retail. That's coming to an end as well. So now nobody's going to be very satisfied with where we end up with, at least initially, but there is this ground that we're both heading towards, where when we overgenerate, we're just another generator on the grid. And that's how we will be compensated. But we are, as was pointed out earlier, generating power when the utility needs it. So if we go to a time of day pricing, then we will be fairly compensated for the value of what's being pushed back. So those two changes are going to have a pretty dramatic impact on net metering, for the utilities and for the owners of these systems. All right. Okay, well, why don't we just call it a day, and we'll plan on getting back together next Tuesday at noon Eastern. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.